Teaching Arizona Law Without Reading Slides. A few weeks later, Sarah attended a real estate class taught by another instructor. The classroom was full, the presentation looked professional, it contained detailed information about Arizona law. She expected to learn quite a bit. Instead, something unexpected happened. The instructor stood behind the podium, turned toward the screen, and spent nearly an hour reading every word that appeared on each slide. Students quickly stopped taking notes. A few quietly checked their phones. Others stared at the screen without asking a single question. When the class ended, Sarah realized she couldn't remember much of what had been covered, even though the information itself had been accurate. Later that afternoon, she shared the experience with David. "I don't understand," she said. "The slides contained good information." "They probably did," David replied, "but students don't come to class to watch someone read. They come to class to learn." That simple statement completely changed the way Sarah viewed presentation slides. Many new instructors believe their slides should contain everything they plan to say. In reality, the opposite is usually true. Slides are visual aids, not speaker notes. Their purpose is to support instruction, highlight important ideas, and keep students focused on key concepts. When instructors simply read what's on the screen, students quickly disengage because they can read faster than someone can speak. Instead of listening, they begin reading ahead or mentally checking out of the lesson. David explained that one of the most effective presentation skills is learning to teach around the slide rather than from the slide. Imagine displaying a slide that simply says material facts. Rather than reading a lengthy definition, begin with a question. What would you do if your seller told you the roof leaked every monsoon season, but asked you not to tell the buyer? Within seconds, the classroom becomes engaged. Students begin discussing ethics, disclosure obligations, and consumer protection before you've even mentioned the statute. Once the discussion develops, you can introduce the applicable Arizona law and explain how it applies to the situation they just analyzed. The slide simply serves as a visual reminder of the topic, while the real learning occurs through conversation. Sarah quickly realized that legal terminology doesn't have to sound intimidating. Arizona statutes and administrative rules often contain formal language because they are written for legal accuracy. Instructors, however, should translate those concepts into plain English without changing their meaning. Students first need to understand the principle before they can comfortably interpret the legal language. Once the concept makes sense, reviewing the statutory wording becomes much easier. David often reminded Sarah that students aren't attending class to memorize statutes. They're learning how those laws affect buyers, sellers, brokers, property managers, landlords, tenants, and the public. Every legal concept should answer a practical question. Why does this law exist? How will I encounter it during a transaction? What happens if I fail to follow it? When students understand the purpose behind the law, remembering the legal requirement becomes much easier. Sarah also became more intentional about designing her slides. Instead of displaying large paragraphs of text, she used simple diagrams, timelines, photographs, contract excerpts, and flowcharts that supported the discussion taking place in the classroom. Students spent less time reading and more time listening, asking questions, and participating in the lesson. The visuals reinforced the instruction rather than competing with it. She also rediscovered the value of the whiteboard. During one class, a student asked how agency relationships changed throughout a complicated transaction involving multiple parties. Rather than searching for another slide, Sarah walked to the whiteboard and sketched the relationships while students talked through the scenario together. By the time the discussion ended, the entire class understood the concept. Sometimes, the simplest teaching tools create the greatest learning. The whiteboard allowed students to watch the idea develop step by step instead of seeing only the finished answer. That process encouraged discussion, invited questions, and made the lesson feel much more interactive than another prepared slide ever could. As Sarah became more comfortable moving away from the screen, she noticed something interesting. She spent less time looking at her slides and more time looking at her students. That one change transformed her classroom. She could immediately recognize when students were confused, when they were ready to move forward, or when a discussion deserved a few extra minutes. Eye contact replaced screen time, and conversations replaced lectures. At the end of class, David smiled. "You hardly looked at your presentation today." Sarah laughed. "I didn't need to." He nodded. "Exactly. The presentation supported you. It didn't become you." That may be one of the most important lessons every instructor learns. Students don't remember the slides nearly as much as they remember the instructor who explained difficult concepts in a way that finally made sense. Presentation software is a valuable teaching tool, but it should never become the teacher. The instructor brings the lesson to life through conversation, examples, questions, and interaction. When Arizona law is presented in a clear, engaging, and practical way, students leave with more than legal knowledge. They leave with confidence that they can apply those principles throughout their real estate careers. Instructor tip: if you catch yourself reading directly from a slide, pause and ask the class a question instead. Turning information into a conversation is one of the fastest ways to increase participation, improve retention, and make legal concepts easier to understand. Question 1. Why is reading presentation slides word for word generally ineffective? Answer: students can read faster than an instructor can speak. When slides are simply read aloud, attention often decreases because students become passive listeners. Slides should support instruction, while the instructor provides explanations, stories, and discussion that bring the material to life. Question 2. How can instructors make Arizona legal concepts easier for students to understand? Answer: instructors should begin with practical examples, real Arizona transaction scenarios, and plain language explanations before introducing statutory language. Helping students understand why the law exists and how it applies in practice improves comprehension and retention. Question 3. What role should presentation slides play during instruction? Answer: presentation slides should reinforce key concepts through visuals, diagrams, timelines, and brief summaries. They should guide the lesson without replacing the instructor's explanations, interaction, or classroom discussions.